Hey cutie. Welcome back or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Laura. Hi, hello, welcome. It's beginning to look a lot like spring in the air. I am so excited as we get some warmer weather here in Michigan. It has been like summertime in Michigan recently, but I am spring mode as spring mode comes. We have greens. We are excited to play with a little bit more color, pastel, and I have a stack of 10 eyeshadow palettes in front of me that I am so excited to reach for over the next couple months, and hopefully I can do some serious damage, no pan left behinding some of these palettes. So I'm going to go in order of smallest palette to largest palette in this video. I know my winter palette rotation we did. Hi buddy, you want to come up here? So I know my winter palette rotation, we actually separated between like colorful and neutral palettes. This is just going to be a mix of everything all at once. Ripley's decided he wants to sit on my lap. He's been I know I've said it before, he's extra snuggly ever since we came back from our trip. He is just like the most snuggly he's ever been ever. Anyway, I have my palettes in front of me, so we'll talk about them in order of smallest to largest. So the first palette is actually a 6-pan palette, and it's a green palette. We're in March, so I tend to like to wear greens in the months of spring just because things are growing, things are blooming, and green is on the horizon. So I have my Sugar Drizzle. This is one of the longest palette names ever. This is Paint Me Green and Call Me a Pickle because I'm done dealing with you. This is what that beautiful palette looks like. This is the pickle palette, what it looks like on the inside. You can see I do have a pan inside of that shade Pickle Juice in the top middle, but this is a beautiful, beautiful palette. I like this because it gives you a lot of staple greens in there, but it kind of gives you these two very unique kind of shades where this, as I'm looking at it, has more of like a green gold flip, but when you see it, it's very like pink, almost fuchsia. And this is a very beautiful shade that I like to use on my lower lash line to grunge out shades. That's like a purple to green, like teal kind of shade. I really like this palette. I could have thrown a couple of these shades in this look and gotten something pretty similar. Next largest palettes are going to be my 9-pan palettes, and I have 2 9-pan palettes that I would like to focus on for spring. The first one is going to be the Sugar Drizzle Fun Size palette. This is the original Fun Size palette, and this is almost like a summer, like a transition-y summer spring palette, just because it's like a pastel neon, like it's a pastel palette on steroids almost. So this guy here is going to be beautiful to throw in and just sprinkle in some color into other everyday looks. I can wear this with my Pan That palette. I can wear this with the other palettes that I'm using in this rotation and get a lot of use out of a lot of things. I also have another Sugar Drizzle palette. This is the Sugar Drizzle Sugar Dreams palette. This is a all shimmer, all duochrome metallic kind of palette. This is so pretty. I really like it for the bottom 2 rows and this shade up here. These 2 shades up top are gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but they're not shades that I really like to use and wear all too often. We know how I feel about purple and blues, and I'm kind of, the ship has sailed for purple and blue in my opinion, for me right now. I mean, this is a very, very beautiful shade. It's a blue with like kind of a pink reflect in it. It is stunning. So I will get a lot of use out of this palette, and clearly this is something that I can use with the Sugar Drizzle palette and pair the 2 palettes very easily together as well. So can't wait to get some use out of this. Like, that shade is so freaking pretty. I love the shade So Tasty. Ugh. I just love green eyeshadow so much. Where can I put you? I love green eyeshadow. Such a gorgeous shade. Now we're moving over to my double-digit palettes, and this is where the bulk of the work is going to be cut out for me over the course of the next few months. So kicking it off, this guy here, this is my Adept Plain Jane palette. This is such a beautiful palette, and this is one of those palettes that it reminds me of spring, but also reminds me of autumn. And really, like, these deeper multichromes in the corners are more of like those deep base multichrome, so they make me think of more autumnal shades. Everything else in the palette though is very springtime, spring toned, very light, very like ethereal, very just like Easter eggy. So really want to get some good use out of this. Again, I don't feel like I have to No Pan Left Behind this complete palette in spring, but if I can get the majority of these shades and then save these deeper tones for later on this year some point, or maybe I just use these as my like grunging out lower lash line shades. After that, I do have another very on the same wavelength kind of palette. This is the Too Faced Pinker Times Ahead. We kind of see like a similar vibe with the similar tones in this palette as the Plain Jane, but this has the kicker of actually having some matte shades in it. But this is another palette. This actually came into my collection January last year, so very, very like wintry spring kind of shades. And I definitely need to get a lot of use out of this by like April. That's like target time for this guy. And this again is the Pinker Times Ahead. This was limited edition a couple years ago. Smells like cotton candy. It smells lovely, but I have just a few shades left out of this guy. Something that was in my winter palette rotation that is making its appearance in my spring rotation, and this is very like transitional kind of palette, so fit a little bit more winter, but really does lean itself well to the springtime months. You've heard me talk about it a couple times recently, and that is the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. This is a beautiful, beautiful palette. It has those pinky tones, it has some sagey tones, and it has some like taupey, neutral, everyday kind of shades. So I think that this is absolutely perfect to wear for like the couple months of springtime. We have like, it just kind of makes me think about like flowers blooming and just like getting ready for spring. So this is kind of like murky weather meets springtime. So it's kind of gray and overcast, but like you have a lot of beautiful, beautiful shades still around you, even though things are a little bit more muted down in like depth. But yeah, I really like this. I'm really excited to reach for this a little bit more. I have not given myself a whole lot of permission to play with this palette. Like these shades are seriously some of my favorites. I freaking love minty kind of shades like this so much. Moving on to my 20 plus palettes, and this is gonna be a lot of work. This is the Unearthly Cosmetics All I Ever Wanted Volume 2. I don't believe Unearthly sells the All I Ever Wanted palettes anymore, which is a humongous shame because these are so beautiful. This one is almost, again, like teetering between spring with like some of the more lighter tones, but autumn with some of these like deeper purples and like bronzes. So if I don't get my full use out of this palette within the next couple months, that's okay. This is going to be something that I'm going to lean into for autumn as well, especially like these kind of orangey shades. I am wearing, or I am panning a gold that I use as a base, so I could use a lot of these shades on top of that. That's what I did today. I have a gold underneath and then a layered green on top, and I could have done something very similar using this palette. Something that I'm not going to open up because it is in another project, but this is another palette that definitely screams springtime to me. This is my Project Level Up Level 3 palette, and I've been working on this for a couple months now, so I'm not going to spoil it by opening this palette up. If you want to see where I am with it, I will link my project in the cards if you want to see what this looks like. I'm sure you've seen it before. This is posted all over the internet all the time. Ensley Reign is a beautiful, beautiful brand, and I've been dying to get more from the brand, but I've been taking a step back because of my other projects. But this is definitely a palette that I can for sure get my use out of because it is in another project. We're almost to the end, guys, I promise. The next palette is one of my big heifer palettes. It's the Natasha Denona Green Brown palette. I did declutter the Purple Blue palette earlier this month, and this is what the Green Brown palette looks like. This is by far one of my favorite Natasha Denona palettes in my collection, and I don't give myself the permission to use this nearly as much as I would like to. These middle rows with the greens are everything that I want to wear. I do actually have the shade Terracotta on my lower lash line today. I could have used a ton of these shades in this look as well, but again, I'm spreading the love with so many palettes, and this is something that if I don't get my full No Pan Left Behind usage in, I won't be upset, because this is a palette that really does transition into autumn as well, with those like super warm tones over here. So maybe like spring over here, and then we transition to autumn on the other side. And then by far, I saved the biggest palette for last, and I know what you're thinking. How can we get bigger than a Natasha Denona 28 pan palette? How? And that's by finding a palette with 30 eyeshadows in it in your collection. This is a good palette to transition from spring to summer also. So if I don't get my like use out of it all up front, I will feel very happy if I can get some use out of this by like the time summer ends, or like midway through summer. But let me shut up and show ya. This is what the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette, if I did not mention that when I showed the outer packaging. But this is what the inside of the palette looks like. Mine has a decent amount of pans in it. This was in a, I think this was in Pan Those Eyeshadows a few times last year. I believe that's where I got those 3 pans, and then I organically hit pan in French Vanilla by just using it when I was using this palette. This is a beautiful palette. I am intimidated by this palette though when I reach into it, and for some reason, it's always the neutrals in this palette that go neglected the longest. So I got a lot of work cut out for me with these, like, say like this bottom half of the palette is really what I want to focus on right now, with a lot more of these like pastel kind of colors, and then maybe I can transition to like autumn with the other, this half of the palette, you know? Let me know if there is anything out of the large stack, if there's anything out of this large stack of palettes that you wanted to see any independent videos on. If you want to see a palette bingo, maybe a multi-palette bingo, maybe just one palette bingo in this, definitely let me know in the comments below. I did mention in my No Pan Left Behind that I was not thinking about using green eyeshadows, and I did pull a bunch of green singles and tuck it into this palette to try to use and then put back into my storage palette. So I am going to try to use as many green eyeshadows without the focus on having to reach for all of my green eyeshadows like it was last year. But that is it for my spring palette rotation. Maybe you guys have similar palettes in your horizons and in your vision for the next couple months. You'll have to let me know what palettes you're thinking about gravitating towards over the next couple months for spring. You'll have to let me know, is it springtime where you are, or maybe you're transitioning to fall right now. I think most of you guys live in the northern hemisphere with me, but who knows? That is it for this video, though. I hope you guys are staying healthy, sane, and safe, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!